if you really mean business in Nigeria, start your day with Business Day. My hearty congratulations to the publisher, Frank Igbogun, for his vision to establish Business Day, to the board of directors and all the editors and staff for your excellent work. This year's forum is happening at an important moment in time. With a new government in office and the palpable yearnings of Nigerians for a better and a more prosperous future. That prosperous future can only be assured by strongly supporting a robust private sector to unlock wealth that in turn will lift everyone in Nigeria. And time is not on our side. The number of Nigerians living in extreme poverty is increasing at an alarming rate. The World Poverty Clock for 2023 showed that 71 million Nigerians are living in extreme poverty. Let me be clear. There is no market for poverty. Why specialize in it? I want to be clear, therefore, from the onset. Nigeria should not be and never be a poor country. And Nigerians are simply tired of being poor. Nigeria must decisively shift from managing poverty to managing wealth. It is time to make poverty history in Nigeria. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the title of my lecture today is The Day the Lion Roared, making Nigeria a global industrial and economic giant. And I am sure many of you have watched the popular and award-winning Disney movie, The Lion King. In the movie, the young lion cub Simba learns to grow up and eventually take over his role as king after his father was murdered by his uncle, Scar. Simba survives countless challenges and traps. He learns also to listen to the wise counsel of Rafiki, which, by the way, means friend in Swahili. Rafiki inspires Simba and explains that the spirit of his great father lived in him. Simba will eventually grow up to become the Lion King that he was destined to become, and will go on to rule the kingdom and restore its glory. The film cost $45 million to make, but grossed over $11.6 billion by 2019. In the process, becoming the most successful animated film ever made. Nigeria, like the cub Simba, has great promise. But the promise is yet to be realized. The day that Nigeria wakes up and becomes a Lion King, everything will change for its people. Everything will change for all of Africa. Along the way, there will be several Rafikis, sincere friends, whose only agenda is to inspire, motivate, and encourage it to be the new king. So take me today as a Rafiki. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for now, Nigeria is developing too slowly and well below its potential. The challenge is that the Lion King in the making, based on its capacity and potential, must learn how to roar. The key to unleashing Nigeria's lionhood, if I may use that phrase, is engineering an industrial revolution, the likes of which we have not seen before. It must be deliberate and intentional. With the share of manufacturing in Nigeria's GDP has been hovering around 7% for decades, the nation has not been able to extricate itself from the comatose of industrial manufacturing sector. The performance of the manufacturing sector in the past 5 years has been poor. Take between 2015 and 2017, the sector declined by minus 1.5%, minus 4.3%, and minus 0.2%, respectively. Now that's in sharp contrast to the dynamic and rapid performance of manufacturing in Asian countries, such as Singapore, Malaysia, India, and China. While Asia has focused on the export of manufactured products, Nigeria's approach has been on import substitution. The manufacturing sector of Nigeria represents only 3% of total revenue from exports, but accounts for 50% of imports into the country. Instead of being forward-looking and expanding the share of manufactured goods in the total export revenue, Nigeria focuses on an unsustainable model of import substitution. Don't get me wrong. Import substitution, while important, is a very restrictive vision. It is focused primarily on survival, instead of looking to create wealth through greater export markets and value diversification. The result is a manufacturing sector that cannot develop to its full potential, nor compete globally. Rather, it is limited to a survival mode and not a global manufacturing growth mode. Nigeria should have a great ambition for its manufacturing sector by shifting towards being integrated into and moving up global and regional value chains, especially in areas of comparative advantage, specialization, and competitiveness. A well-developed and policy-enabled manufacturing sector with an export orientation will spur greater innovation, accelerate business and investment-friendly industrial policies to drive export market development and structural transformation of the economy. Let us take the example of Vietnam, a nation at war for 20 years with the United States. Despite challenges, it quickly mimicked successful Asian countries, such as South Korea, by pushing into relatively complex product categories and horizontally diversifying through processing of agricultural products. Its exports in 2020 was very well diversified, with electrical manufacturing, electrical machinery and equipment, earning it a whopping $153 billion. Machinery, including computers, earned it $24 billion. Footwear, $24 billion. Clothing and accessories, $16 billion approximately, among others. In total, Vietnam's export in 2020 was a whopping $348 billion. Now, according to Financial Times report a few days ago, it says, and I quote, Vietnam's export-led growth pulled millions of people out of poverty in the last 30 years. Malaysia achieved vertical diversification from an agricultural base of rubber and palm oil. It invested heavily in high-tech sectors, such as electronics. In 2020, its biggest exports by value were in the electronic integrated circuits, refined petroleum oils, palm oil, vulcanized rubber and accessories, and solar diodes and semiconductors. Its export values in 2020 depended on electrical machinery and equipment, $86.6 billion. Mineral oils, fuels including oil, $25.5 billion. Machinery including computers, $20.2 billion. Animal, vegetable oils and waxes, $13.5 billion. And rubber articles, $11.2 billion, among others. In total, ladies and gentlemen, Malaysia's exports in 2020 was valued at $234 billion. By contrast, Nigeria's exports in 2020 were dominated by mineral fuels, including oil, valued at $29.7 billion, which accounted for 89% of the country's exports. Nigeria's total export value was a mere $33.5 billion. Now, that is 1/10 of Vietnam's. That dollar amount of Nigeria's export represents a minus 3.6% decrease since 2016 and a drop of 37.5% between 2019 and 2020. Interestingly, Nigeria's imports, dominated by machinery, including computers, mineral fuels, including oil, vehicles, electrical machinery and equipment, pharmaceuticals, plastics, and so on, are all what Vietnam and Malaysia are exporting. And worse, Nigeria imports mineral fuels, which it should be producing as a leading crude oil exporting nation. It imports crude, it exports crude, it imports refined products. A befuddling irony indeed. Here is another wake-up and disturbing statistic. In 1990, Malaysia's exports totaled $32.8 billion, meaning that Nigeria today is where Malaysia was 30 years ago in terms of export revenue performance. And so what's the message here? While Nigeria's export basket has hardly changed, Malaysia and Vietnam have used aggressive horizontal and vertical industrial manufacturing diversification to move from low-value products to high-valued market products. The result is seen in the comparative wealth of these three countries. While export value per capita is $7,100 for Malaysia and $3,600 for Vietnam, it is a mere $160 for Nigeria. While Malaysia and Vietnam move to global manufacturing growth, creating massive wealth and jobs for themselves, Nigeria remains in survival mode, still unable to substitute the imports of its petroleum products, while being one of the largest exporters of crude oil. African countries, including Nigeria, have had policies, templates, and programs for industrialization, of course, and expanding industrial manufacturing for decades. But there is a huge gap between policy ideas and actions. Today, capacity utilization of factories in Nigeria hovers around 40% compared to a desired 70%. The reality, in view of several challenges facing the industrial manufacturing sector, is that firms are moving to other neighboring countries where there is greater macroeconomic stability, more supporting enabling environments, and a better ease of doing business. To be a manufacturer in Nigeria is not an easy venture. You succeed not because of the ease of doing business, but by surmounting several constraints that limit industrial manufacturing. In short, it is not the ease of doing business. It is the pain of doing business. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the major challenge facing the industry in Nigeria is the very high cost and unreliability of the supply of electricity. And I want to commend you, Governor Obaseki, for what you've done to say that you have over 1,000 plus. And of course, we were very happy to support Azura, and that's a great thing. And I'm glad also that the governor of Jigawa is here. And the governor of Jigawa, if I might have your attention, it might help you. We actually have on our books, I chair the board of Africa 50. We have on our books something called Jigawa Solar to build 1,000 megawatts of solar in Jigawa. But it's been on the books for 6 years. I hope now that Damodi has become governor, we will do the 1,000 megawatt solar for Jigawa. Load shedding and unreliable power have made the cost of manufacturing extremely prohibitive and uncompetitive. Most of the manufacturing companies self-provide energy through a reliance on expensive generators and diesel and heavy fuel oil. The polluting emissions make them brown industries, not green industries, and we should pay attention to this. The EU just launched what's going to be the EU carbon border tax. And so unless we are greening the energy supply systems, you're going to face very high tariffs in the EU because we are not greening our energy supply systems. It's been estimated that by the IMF that Nigeria loses $29 billion, 5.8% of its annual GDP, due to a lack of energy and unreliable power supplies. Also, according to the IMF, Nigeria spends $14 billion per year on generators and fuel. The lack of electricity is killing Nigerian industries. Recent surveys by the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria indicate that industries spend 93.1 billion naira on alternative energy in 2018, and they lose $10 trillion due to power failure. The fact is, no business can survive in Nigeria without power generators. To put this in revenue perspective, the annual total revenue of the government of Nigeria last year was 10 trillion naira. So the industrial sector loses the same revenue as the nation collects in 1 year. What an irony. What would have happened if the industries realized 10 trillion naira and pay taxes? At a conservative corporate tax rate of 30%, that means the Nigerian government loses 3 trillion naira annually in taxes that it could have been collecting from the industries if it simply provided them with electricity. Sadly, this Rafiki will say, the abnormal has become normal. I went to see President El-Sisi of Egypt. In 2018, they had an energy deficit of 6,000 megawatts. In 2022, they had an energy generation surplus of 20,000 megawatts. So what's it? Let's power up. If we power up, we will be an incredible nation in terms of unlocking our potential. Let the abnormal not go on being normal. Now, traveling on the road one day, Lagos-Ibadan Road, I saw an advertisement on a billboard that caught my attention. It was advertising generators with a bold statement: we are the nation's #1 reliable power supplier. Now compare that with the situation in South Korea, which has diversified its exports into high-value manufacturing. On a trip to South Korea to a company called KEPCO, Korea Electric Power Corporation, a few years ago, I was briefed, and I was told that they only have 2 minutes of power outage in the country. Not sure that I heard correctly. I had to ask them, is that per day, per hour, per week, per month, per quarter? The response was quick and resolute. 2 minutes per year. How can we compete with the likes of Korea, Malaysia, and Vietnam? Unless Nigeria decisively tackles its energy deficiency and reliability, its industries will remain uncompetitive. There should be, Your Excellencies, and all that are hearing me as a Rafiki today, I've always said I'll live as a Nigerian. I'll die as a Nigerian. And on Resurrection Day, I'll ask God for permission, if possible. If I may come out with a green, white, green flag in my hand. But we are tired of being poor. There should therefore be massive investments in gas to power and to ensure stable baseload power for our industries. Hydropower sources are there massively. Large-scale solar systems, preferential power supply to the industries, and to support industrial mini-grids that concentrate power in industrial zones. In addition, we should develop more efficient utilities, reducing technical and non-technical losses in power generation, transmission, and distribution systems. I'm glad to say the African Development Bank is investing heavily in Nigeria in support of the power sector. We provided $200 million for the Nigerian Electrification Project, designed to fill the electricity access gap in Nigeria. We have also invested $257 million in the Nigerian Transmission Project to strengthen power evacuation and regional interconnection. Today, we are investing $20 billion to develop what is called the Desert to Power, all across the Sahelian countries, all 11 countries, including all of northern Nigeria. And by the way, that includes Your Excellency, Jigawa, and all the others, to provide electricity for 250 million people. Excellencies, we've done this at scale. If you look at Morocco, you have the new Ouarzazate, the largest concentrated solar power plant in the world. We financed that. If we can do that in Morocco, let's do that in Nigeria. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, industrial development is constrained by a poor state of transport, ports, and logistic infrastructure. It costs $35,000 to export 100 tons of produce from Nigeria, compared to just $4,000 in Ghana. About 90% of passenger and freight movements in Nigeria rely on roads, but only 18% of the roads are paved. Meanwhile, our seaports are gridlocked. The African Development Bank is also currently working with central banks and countries to design and support the establishment of youth entrepreneurship investment banks. Look, I go around, talk to African presidents. People tell me we have youth empowerment programs. Yeah? Well, how come I'm not seeing many young people walk to me and say they've been empowered? I think a lot of our youth empowerment programs simply empowers those that say they are empowering young people. The young people don't need that kind of empowerment. They need investment. That's the best asset we have. And that's why we are, as a bank, working to create these youth entrepreneurship investment banks. There will be new financial institutions run by young, professional, and highly competent experts and bankers to develop and deploy new financial products and services for the businesses and ventures of young people. You're a young person, you go to the bank and they ask you, how old are you? You say, I'm 24 years old. They ask you, what's your tax return for the last 40 years? How do you do that? And many countries want to establish the youth entrepreneurship investment banks. Nigeria should follow suit. And I did mention this to His Excellency President Tinubu, and he assured me that Nigeria will establish a youth entrepreneurship investment bank. Because I think this will be a game changer for Nigeria. Excellencies, as I come to the last part of my speech, I cannot finish without talking about agriculture. You know my passion for that. We must make agriculture a major wealth-creating sector. It is time to make bold policies to drive structural transformation of agriculture with infrastructure, spatial economic policies that will turn Nigeria's rural economies from being zones of economic misery that they are today to becoming zones of economic prosperity. The key to doing that is establishing special agro-industrial processing zones, enabled with critical infrastructure in which the private sector food and ag businesses can translocate into, process, add value, package food, transport food, and be competitive in local, regional, and global markets. They will turn cotton into textile and garments. They will turn tomatoes into purees and tomato paste. They will turn milk into cheese, butter, and, of course, nice milk that was substituted for the imported milk. They will drive to transformation of rice products. They will process oil palm into multiple derivatives. They will turn cocoa into cocoa beans, cocoa butter, cocoa powder, and chocolate. They will turn cassava into starch, tapioca, glucose, fructose, sorbitol, and ethanol. The booming wealth will touch every part of Nigeria and every person in Nigeria, from rural to urban areas. And that's why I'm very delighted that the African Development Bank, the Islamic Development Bank, and the International Fund for Agricultural Development are implementing a $540 million program to create these zones in 9 states. And right now we have requests already for 20 additional states. That's the way to go. And Governor, you put up your slide and you show me that zone that when I was minister, will help you build more of those zones. Now let me say that at the end, it's all about small and medium-sized enterprises. We have to make sure that we connect them to these global value chains that we are talking about. From China to Korea, the way they develop is a pulley effect. They develop their big industries and they connect them to their small and medium-sized enterprises. And they finance that. And I'm glad that we have bankers here, Access Bank CEOs here, and several others that are here. The challenge that we face is these SMEs are not getting enough financing in Nigeria. They only receive 1% of total credit from financial institutions, with a financing gap of 617 billion naira. And if you look at the interest rate, look at how much the interest rate is. In Japan, minus 0.1%. United States, for small businesses, 3.9%. China, 0.25%. India, 4%. But Nigerian manufacturers face a high interest rate of 14%. 28 is double. Okay, I'm even behind the curve on that. Okay. I think the Bank of Industry, the Bank of Agriculture, and the Nigerian Import and Export Bank should be significantly recapitalized at scale to provide loans at affordable interest rates to manufacturers and small and medium-sized enterprises. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me close with the issue of foreign exchange. A perennial binding constraint facing manufacturers in Nigeria is the unpredictability and availability of foreign exchange. It has triggered a major decline in foreign direct investment inflows into Nigeria. The 2023 World Investment Report indicates that sovereign direct investment inflows to Nigeria declined precipitously from $3.3 billion in 2021 to a negative $187 million in 2022, the largest decline across the continent. Nigeria must learn the lesson here. Simply using foreign exchange reserves to back and overvalue the local currency is not a sustainable policy. To grow Nigeria's economy in a transformational way, there is an urgent need to move away from solely depending on managing demand for forex to expanding the supply and availability of forex through greater export-oriented manufacturing. This will extricate Nigeria from relying only on the export of crude oil for access to forex and the instability that arises from that, from shocks to global oil prices. I wish here to commend the bold decision of President Tinubu in removing the distortions in the multiple foreign exchange windows. This will help to turn the tide on foreign direct investment flows into Nigeria, and it was good to also hear that from Dr. Kale when he made his presentation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as I close, to drive greater investments into Africa, we established what's called the Africa Investment Forum. This brings project developers, financiers, everybody together in one investment room. Over the last 4 years that we've started it, we have mobilized $142 billion of investment interest to Africa. That includes raising $15.6 billion for the Lagos-Abidjan corridor. Several Nigerian companies have benefited, and they look forward to the Africa Investment Forum. Let me make a shout out here. The next forum will be in Marrakesh, Morocco from the 8th to 10th November. You are all welcome. It will provide another opportunity to Nigeria's private sector to mobilize global capital to unleash the power of industrial manufacturing in Nigeria. Come with bankable projects, we will find you the investors. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let's revamp industrial manufacturing in Nigeria. Industrial manufacturing can earn Nigeria 10 times more than what it earns today from relying on oil. As the late industrial pioneer and the icon Chief Odutola once said, oil will finish, industries will not. With the right policies, investment frameworks, infrastructure, logistics, financing frameworks, and powered by highly talented, trained, dynamic, and useful workforce of Nigeria, I am confident that Nigeria will fully unleash the power of its manufacturing sector. Nigeria's export revenue will grow more than 10 times by focusing on export market-driven industrial manufacturing that is integrated into global production and logistic value chains. It will unleash a new wave of wealth for Nigeria. Only then will Simba the cub be transformed into a roaring Lion King. President Tinubu, please turn Nigeria into an industrial economic giant. It is Nigeria's turn. Let's make it happen, and thank you very much.